Chris Coleman.
Thank you.
All yours.
Appreciate everybody being patient while we get going here. We are very flexible, right? And so I don't want this to be a formal thing. We don't care about the time. We care about people that are interested in shifts and trends in education, how we can disrupt the educational processes to try and find more effective ways of addressing them. So because we're Phoenix Startup Week today, how many people, by a show of hands, are in the process of starting a business? A few, okay. Okay, so about 5. How many are working for or started a business within the last 3 years? Okay, a few more. Okay, and the rest of you, what are you here for? What are you looking for? Suggestions?
I work with education entrepreneurs.
Excellent, excellent. Other ideas? What you're hoping to get out of this conversation today?
New ideas.
New ideas, good. Okay, very good. Well, we'll get some new ideas. Okay, so getting started here. Just a brief introduction. So first off, my name's Chris Coleman. I'm president of Woz U. I'm an Arizona native. I've spent about 16 years in enterprise software, from software engineering through really all different roles within developing software products. And most of my time has been spent in the education and technology field in developing adaptive learning systems. So adaptive learning systems are trying to rely on techniques like artificial intelligence and machine learning to try and understand people's patterns and how they learn and instructing them in ways that are the most effective to them. And I'm a wildcat, so I'm in hostile territory. If anyone wants to take a shot at me, now's the time while I'm facing you guys. All right, so that's myself. Really my passion has always been in education and technology. It's kind of the crossroads of really what I love. And so joining the Woz U team and starting this initiative has really been a blessing for me because the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish is rethinking things, right? We talk about our brand as education reprogram. So that's really what we're trying to do. We're looking at the current ways that people are educated, the most effective ways that people learn, and trying to leverage technology and leverage better processes to challenge some of those notions and find better ways to do it. So who's Woz U? Woz U was started as a partnership with Steve Wozniak. Show of hands, everyone know who Steve Wozniak is. Co-founder of Apple, yep. So this is the brain behind really what, we're coming out with the Apple I, what brought personal computing into an affordable format, and really a key portion of why personal computers are in everybody's home now today. So obviously he's had a really tremendous career, and the way that he had changed personal computing and really redefined the future of computing back in the 80s, his new initiative is really around doing the same thing in education, right? Finding another industry that's ripe for disruption and something that is, in need of a better way of thinking about things. Our team at Woz U, it's kind of a hybrid approach, right? So half of our team comes from higher education and a long pedigree of integrity and success in operating higher education institutions. The other half of our team comes from education technology, right? So we've got half of the format and understanding the challenges in higher education, and we've got another portion of our team that's focused on taking those problems as they're explained to us and trying to find better ways of addressing them, leveraging technology. We launched the brand back in October of 2017, so just a few months ago. We had an event here in town called DesTech. We made an announcement there. Steve Wozniak came in, did the little segue thing, and the rest is history. We're headquartered in Phoenix. We're actually in Scottsdale up near Talking Stick Resort. And our mission is simple. It's to make education more effective, more affordable, and more available. Okay. So we're here to talk about education as a service. So let's start by talking about this term as a service, which is kind of a buzzworthy term that gets tacked on to the end of just about everything. Show of hands, who's heard the term as a service, something as a service? Okay, great. Put your hands up. Put your hands down if you don't want me to ask you to explain it. Okay. So we've got about 3 brave souls in the audience, and this is one of these tech-driven terms that kind of becomes second nature. We hear about everything as a service, but we don't quite understand exactly what that means. So I'd like to start today's presentation with a bit of a brief history lesson, right? And really the first initial trend is the notion of SaaS, or software as a service. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. And to really understand it, we got to go prior to this trend of as a service, and we got to start looking at enterprise software. So prior to a really service-oriented approach to developing products and systems, enterprise software products had some pretty ugly challenges. And if you don't understand enterprise software, it's just a fancy word for big, important software systems, right? Okay, so if you think back before the internet, or before things were really actively connected to other systems, we had a lot of pretty big challenges, right? We used to get all of our software systems on disk. We'd install them on a server that was local to our business. We've got a closet somewhere that's got a rack full of servers. We install our systems there. We install a client on each of the different machines, right? Big challenges with this, right? So first off, it's a big upfront purchase, because if I'm gonna license you software in that format, okay, you own it. And so when you purchase it, I've got to get all the revenue off of you that I possibly can, because that's the one transaction we're going to get, right? So it's a huge upfront purchase, and you're really buying the entire system whether you need it all or not, right? You have a pretty long time before you see any return on investment, because we have to do an installation, we have to do a configuration, we have to do training, you have to get the system live, work through any of those kinks. And a lot of pretty big challenges, because we're used to every day. Currently, software systems will have bugs and issues and improvements, and they're fixed kind of now on a daily basis, or even an hourly basis with some systems. Back then, you'd have to get a disk, right? So when you installed your Windows 98, it was what it was until they released a revision 2 disk, and like how many people actually installed that, right? So whatever security violations that were in there, they just kind of persisted because the company couldn't control the version that you were operating on, right? So we have this really disconnected experience between the users of these systems and the vendors of them. Long time before you see any return on investment in it. And it's totally unforgiving if you make a poor decision, right? You talk to a bunch of different vendors, you choose the right system, you go through months, maybe years of implementing and launching it, and if you somehow overlooked a feature that you really needed, there's no adjusting, right? So it's an incredibly unforgiving format. And ultimately, what you're hoping for the entire time is that you're working with a trusted vendor, you've done your due diligence, you understand the system that you're going to implement, and hopefully I can get like a 10-year run out of using the system, right? Because I don't want to go through this every year, okay? So that's enterprise software circa early 2000s or in the 90s, and we've really evolved to a much better format. And that's this notion of a service-oriented approach, right? It's services first. It's leveraging the connectivity between systems to keep things current, to keep feedback coming in from our customers. So the as-a-service model is really intended to be a plug-and-play format, right? If you're going to start a business, think now if we wanted to start a business, there's a number of different software services and systems that you don't need to install, you don't need to configure, you don't need to own, you can license them and rent them based on your needs. If you decide you're going to do your marketing through MailChimp, because that's a great software service, and then a month later you kind of decide that didn't really meet your needs, no offense to MailChimp, you can shift to another system within a couple of days, or maybe a week, right? It's no longer this yearly cycle. So the notion of services, it's really intended to create a couple of different benefits, right? So the first is a reduced time to benefit. The thought being, if I have a strategy that my business needs to undertake today, how long until I can get that executed and realize the benefit of that strategy, right? In a software service model, it's in the matter of days or weeks, right? In a former enterprise service model, you're talking months or years. It's going to lower costs. You no longer need to own your hardware. You no longer need to host your servers. You don't have to have a team of 5 people maintaining them, right? So you can offload a lot of those responsibilities of these systems onto the vendor because they control everything in the cloud. They manage and maintain it themselves. The services are available. Scalability is a huge benefit, right? So think about, in former days, you would bring in a system, you'd host it on your own hardware, you configure everything in your company, and imagine if, let's say your Google Apps or your Office 365, imagine if when your company scales to 200 people, your hardware doesn't actually support 200 people. So now you gotta go through a bunch of challenges to be able, you don't have to worry about that anymore, right? You just create a couple more users, your bill goes up a little bit, and everything magically, automatically scales. It's a wonderful world we live in. And it increases reliability, right? How often does a software service that your company depend on actually go down? It's pretty minimal compared to 15 years ago, right? When it was your problem that went down, it was your hardware that failed, and you had to call your guy at midnight to want to get it fixed, okay? So that's really the notion of as a service. And there's really three primary different channels for it, right? And this is a little bit hard to read here, but the three different areas that have really gained adoption starts with infrastructure as a service. So this is really your cloud computing, it's virtualization of machines and operating systems and servers. And the thought here is, if you want to build something, they're going to offer you the computing power that you need to be able to deliver, okay? Then we migrate into platform as a service, and it builds on top of infrastructure. The thought here being, we create kind of an environment or an ecosystem that you can take whatever you're building and host it on top of that cloud computing using that platform. And then lastly, we have software as a service, right? And so this is a fully contained software product that's available to be consumed by businesses or individuals. So really three different channels that have really gained adoption and gained traction. You'll hear a lot of other concepts. Has anybody heard any that are not on this list? Or you want to just mix them up together because that's how it works?
Oracle.
Oracle? Okay, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Oracle plays in a lot of these different areas. And you'll see overlap, right? So, you know, Azure also has its own infrastructure, and Amazon also has its own platform. You know, a lot of the big players play in multiple areas here.
Talent as a pipeline or something like that?
Talent as a pipeline,
Right.
Sure. Content as a service is a big one, right? It's companies that create content and deliver it to be consumed by other systems. Databases as a service, there's a lot of them, right? The notion is still the same. It's offloading the burden of having to maintain these systems, and as a consumer or a business, you just get to rely on leveraging them and using them, assuming that they're going to be up, assuming that they're going to be available, allowing you to pay as you go, right? So the infrastructure that Amazon has, you know, none of us could afford, but the fact is we can all leverage and benefit from that, and you do it on a pay-as-you-go model. So if you only have 5 customers, it's pretty cheap, right? And as your business grows to 500 customers, you're making more money and you can afford to scale, and they charge you in accordance to that. Okay, so really, really powerful stuff here. And feel free to ask questions as we go. Is everybody good so far? Very good. All right, so thinking about this trend over the last 15 years in this as-a-service model and a service-oriented approach, it's really transformed how technology businesses and consumers interact. And really, if you think about it, you can start your business today on an iPad, leveraging these services, right? So what would you need to do? You need to create a legal entity, and you like ship that off to LegalZoom and pay them $100. Okay, you need a website. You can build that using a Squarespace or a Wix type of software service. You need a marketing platform. You can use MailChimp. You need a sales management platform. You can use Salesforce. So you can take a look at every different area of operating your business. And there's typically many software services that are available for you to benefit from. And a lot of the better players integrate really well with each other, right? So it's really a powerful thing that, you know, what used to take us years to launch a business and get our strategy executed, you can really do now in a couple of weeks using an iPad. It's amazing, okay? And what it's really done, if you think about it, and you get out of this service notion of the buzzwords and the technology behind it, it's really introduced unprecedented levels of agility for businesses, right? Allowing us to control our businesses, to steer them. If your strategy shifts, there's typically a service that's going to help you make that shift, right? You can take different components and replace certain ones to meet your needs, right? You can evolve quickly, and you can operate your business more agile, letting your business strategies lead you, as opposed to letting the technology lead you and limit you on what you can and can't do. Okay. So, agility's been a key factor of this as-a-service movement. Let's explore another industry that's in need of agility outside of software. So we saw this slide before, enterprise software. Here's the challenges that we've got. Big upfront purchases, long time before the ROI, really unforgiving. Hopefully we get a 10-year shelf life. And that sounds very similar to me to the education industry, right? You can almost swap those out and leave the challenges. So think about higher education. Got a big upfront purchase. right? You got a long time before you finish that degree, that 4, that 5 years, that maybe 8 years if you're going for an advanced degree, or if you're just lazy. You got a long time before you see the ROI on that. Now, it's also really unforgiving if you made a poor decision. Did you really do the homework and the research to understand that the career that you're going into is going to warrant the investment that you've made in your education? Or maybe you did the basket weaving thing because your parents forced you to go to school and that's what you intended to do, and 6 years later you pop out and can't really get a job, right? So it's really unforgiving for poor decisions. And we hope we get a 10-year shelf life, but is that the truth? No, because most industries that really leverage the education that you get in your degree require ongoing learning, right? It's very rare that you can go through that 4-year degree, get out, and that's all you ever need to know for the rest of your 30, 40-year career to be successful and to grow and attain all those benefits that we hope for. So a lot of parallels that we're seeing between the challenges and the shift that enterprise software went through and the current state in education. Okay? All right. So how do we shift the paradigm? We apply a lot of the same principles, right? Education as a service, it's going to address these same pain points. Big upfront purchase, why don't we make education more affordable? Why don't we make it pay as you go? Why don't we make it more agile in the sense that if your focus is on getting through your education and seeing that ROI, well, let's accelerate it, let's make it market driven, let's drop Greek mythology as a required elective because you have to hit 120 credits, right? Let's challenge some of these notions and leverage what the software industry has benefited from in agility to applying that in the educational space, okay? It's really unforgiving if you make a poor decision. Okay, let's make it faster and cheaper to adjust course. If you're going through a couple of courses and you start to understand that maybe the industry shifting, this opportunity is no longer here for me, or I just don't enjoy it, let's make it quicker and less punishing to adjust to a different course of education. Okay, and this is the biggest piece, right? We hope for a 10-year shelf life, but we really want lifelong incremental learning. Okay, so how do we get to an educational model that gives you the essential skills up front and then allows you to incrementally continue to learn throughout the course of your career? Because that's what we all should be doing, whether it's on the job or through self-learning, or maybe you hate your job and you go home and you try and read to get to the next stage, right? We want to be able to have education support those things, right? Affordably be able to go back to your educator and have them help you get to the next stage. Okay. So how can we do that, right? How can we leverage technology and some of the lessons learned and apply that in education? Okay, so education as a service is designed to support and supplement existing institutions, right? The thought is not completely rebuild education from the ground up. There's great educators out there, there's great institutions out there, they have great missions, they work their tails off to support all of us, and we want to be able to support them through services, right? To make them better equipped, to reduce the burden on them, just like software as a service reduced the burden on your IT teams, right? Let's empower our educators to do a better job. So we can do that through curriculum services, right? So think about whether you were in K-12 or you're in university, you got the textbook that was relevant at the time, that the course said, here's your textbook. When was that textbook written? How current is it? Okay? We're in a day and age where nothing's older than a week anymore, right? We want current, immediate access to information, right? And so why don't we have curriculum services that are more real-time, that rely on current trends and current concepts and current events, as opposed to just hoping what was written 8 years ago is still relevant, right? We can do a better job with that. What about student platforms? So let's leverage technology and systems to do things like automate grading, right? Automate delivery of common instruction. Has anybody heard of the term flipped classroom? Yes? Okay. So the notion of a flipped classroom is instead of the teacher teaching and then you go home and struggle with your homework, right? You're delivered a lecture that you do in your own time, and your time with the teacher, you are supported in your learning, right? So you do your homework with the teacher and you do your lecture time on your own through some media that you're given. Okay, so we can leverage technology to do the same type of thing, right? To alleviate the burden on our educators and make sure that students are getting the same level of support in a more effective format. Okay, what about insights for your instructors? Okay, the notion of data-driven education, there's been some pretty good attempts at it, right? But there's a long way to go. And so the ability for an instructor to come in and immediately in real time see who's struggling, Who's successful? Where do I focus my time? The secret, it's not a secret. Every educator is overwhelmed. Everybody that's got 20 students in a classroom or 350 students in a lecture hall, okay, it's really challenging to service all of them in an individualized fashion, right? But technology can help us to identify the patterns in the student's performance and to empower the teacher to understand how to best spend their time, okay? What about virtual instruction? Imagine, right, a world where your instructor is sick or absent and somebody can virtual in, right, and teach that lecture, being remote. Why does the instructor need to be in front of you? How do we get more qualified instructors more available? And how do we empower our effective instructors to have a wider reach for more students by leveraging virtual instruction? Okay, analytics and insights, we talked about that a bit. Let's get more in tune to the data in the performance of our learning and the most effective formats for learning. And let's make the system adaptive, right? Let's ensure that every student is getting a personalized experience, and we get away from the notion of one size fits all, right? That we don't teach every lesson the same way to all 20 or 300 students in the classroom, right? But we allow a system to help support that instruction based on what's most effective for how you learn, okay? And then of course, diagnostic and intervention is a big piece of this. Let's leverage systems to try and assess our students and understand where their gaps are and deliver customized instruction to meet those gaps. Okay. Any questions on any of that so far? Good. All right, so interesting slide here. On the left side, you'll see, Salesforce is kind of the most common use case of a successful software as a service company. And a lot of studies have been done on them. This here was provided by Accenture back in 2012, so a little bit dated, but it's still relevant. On the left side, you see a couple of the top lessons that were learned in Salesforce's transition to a leading provider of software as a service. And on the right, you see how that could be applied in the education space as well. Okay, so what worked for Salesforce? Decide on your business model before you do anything else, right? Understand how your business is going to operate. In education, we want to rethink the educational formats in all different demographics with an emphasis on supplementing existing educational institutions. Okay? Salesforce recommended that they build the product from day one with a focus on customer experience and value to the customer. It's no different in education, right? We want personalized learning to become a reality. We want you to maximize your ROI because what you're purchasing is a customized educational experience that's specific to you and your needs and your goals. Okay? Salesforce instilled a customer for life mindset, right? They wanted to make sure that as a service, our customers stay with us, we continue to grow our customer base. As your needs shift, our systems and our services are going to shift along with you, and we're going to continue to grow with you. Why doesn't education do the same thing, right? We create an educational ecosystem that becomes less transactional. You don't go to school for a transaction in a period and then go off and do something else until probably something bad happens or you're dissatisfied with something, right? Make it less transactional. Make it a consistent stream of incremental improvement in your education, right? And progressing you towards the next level. It's kind of like fitness, right? It's like the moment you take your eye off of it, things get out of control. And then you go back and you get really focused like January 1st to maybe January 4th. But education should be the same thing. It's an investment in your time and in growing your skills and abilities. Okay. Salesforce recommended that the product development had to be agile, right? They really pushed towards this notion of continuous deployment and delivery of their system. It's updated, daily. And coming from a format in enterprise software where you were lucky to get an update shipped to you in the mail twice a year, maybe, right? They started doing updates that were daily, right? Systematically, and then it was streamed over to you through the internet. So why aren't we doing the same thing in education, right? That the curriculum maintains relevancy because it could be updated monthly instead of every 5 years, right? It could be updated weekly, daily. It could be relevant to the news that came through this morning, okay? Salesforce shifted to their customer service not being about answering technical questions. They wanted their customer service being an interaction with you to empower you to use their system to meet your goals. Education should be the same thing, right? We want to make sure that your interactions with educators are specific and personalized around your needs and your challenges. Okay. Lastly, they wanted to rethink leadership in their organization to be able to quickly make changes, and adapt to change. The service model in education supports the same thing. We want to facilitate rapid implementation of new strategies, right? So as your educators are finding better, more effective ways of doing things, we want a system that supports them in doing that. All right, so where do we start? Okay, I think we start in software engineering. We start here because, everybody does with software engineering, yes? No? Okay. We start here because there's a tremendous skills gap in software. Okay, so this is, I think, 2015 data, open computing related jobs, 530,000, and we're producing about 60,000 computer science graduates per year. Okay, so a pretty big gap there. Okay, we also have a broken pipeline coming in from the K-12 space, right? So this is illustrating that 90% of parents indicated that they want their children to start learning computer science principles in primary school. But only 40% of schools are actually teaching it. Okay? Any ideas why we're not doing a more effective job of teaching technology in K-12?
The teachers are not trained.
Teachers aren't trained. Numero uno. Other ideas, or was it all the same suggestions?
Old curriculum.
Old curriculum, absolutely.
Budgets.
Yeah, money.
Funding, budgets, absolutely. So we gotta fix that, right? Because, this is where, so much of our opportunity, we talk about STEM, right? The schools are starting to support more STEM, science, technology, education, math. They throw art in there, call it a different word, right? But the fact of the matter is, 76% of the STEM jobs are software or computer related jobs, right? This isn't a chemistry problem, it's a technology problem, okay? So we've got to make sure that we are empowering the schools, not just higher education, but down into primary schools, because the funding is challenging, right? Their curriculum is dated, and the educational demographic, right? Our current generation of educators didn't come up with these skills. So if you walk into any school and you say, we've got a great effective new reading program or math program, who wants to pilot it? You get a lot of volunteers. If you said, I'm gonna come in here and offer you a different coding or information security program, how many volunteers do you think you get? Everybody's scared to death, right? Because they're not trained. It's not their fault. This is just kind of the shift that we're going through as a nation. Okay, but we can help support that by offering them better systems, by offering them better training, and by alleviating some of those challenges. Why don't we have people that are qualified and idle remotely instruct them, right? So if your staff isn't interested or qualified, or it's intimidating to them, why don't we have somebody else who is qualified, right? A lot of people in this room would be qualified to help explain and teach some of these basic technology concepts. We could do that virtually, right? A lot of different ways that we can help support that broken pipeline. So technology is where we like to start because of the gap, also because it's just awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Woz U's plan. Do we have any questions so far? Kind of good, big fancy dream here. All right, so Woz U's plan, Steve Wozniak wants to disrupt and make a change in education, right? He's passionate about education. He's known for Apple computers. But what is lesser known is he spent a large portion of his time, even during Apple's heyday, volunteering as a teacher, right, in primary school. So he's passionate about education, seeing the trend, seeing the gap. We see every industry shifting, right? And education has made gains. I'm not here to say that it's all doom and gloom, but not to the same degree as other industries, right? Transportation, totally changed, right? So there's so many different areas that are being more progressive than education. They're being effective more than education and seeing better gains. So that's what we're here to accomplish. And we do that through our version of an education as a service model. Okay, so I'm gonna try and walk you guys through this. At the core of what we do, it starts with personalized learning. Okay, so everything that we do, everything that we invest in, everything that we build is about giving the student a personalized and unique experience to meet their needs. Okay. Educational services that are offered, we have instructors that can be delivered remotely, virtually, on-site. We have training programs to train your faculty to become more equipped as an instructor in technology concepts. We've got a modular curriculum that's current, that's relevant, that's able to be serviced to other institutions. Okay, we have faculty training, I mentioned that. We have systematic grading. And we have career services that tie the loop together from students that have some type of goal in learning a technology concept down to the back end and achieving that goal and having support to actually get there beyond the institution. Okay? The programs and the curriculums that we create, they're all market driven, right? So we get out of the academic bubble of teaching what is relevant because we think it's relevant. We talk to the employers. We say, what are you looking for? How can I give you exactly what you need? Good question.
Yes, have you all ever taken time to talk with the student themselves?
Say that again.
Have you taken time to speak with the student themselves?
Sure.
Because, so for example, I substitute teach, and I've spoken with students, and I understand providing virtual and remote teaching, but then I feel like they are so computerized
Sure.
that they have lost their touch of communicating.
Yep.
That's one. And not only on top of that, two, they wanted to actually have a conversation face to face.
Agreed.
So when I was a sub for a high school AP class, AP government class, they were so computerized. Well, our teacher just says, do the homework on the computer and go from there.
Yeah.
And then they're like, they'll come out with their phones and do their homework on the computer. But then I'm like, let's just talk.
Yeah.
And they really appreciated the fact that we had conversation. So, and teaching them a basic skill such as a handshake, they were just like so amazed.
Sure.
Because that's like the first human touch, at least in our culture. But at the same time, I understand that yes, teach virtual and remotely as well, and then it's also our responsibility as a teacher to take on, to learn it. But the costs involved and that a little loss of communication with face-to-face interaction
Sure.
is definitely a factor because students nowadays, or at least this generation, doesn't know how to talk to people.
So I totally agree with that. That's a really good observation. And so a lot of those are the same concepts that we're challenging as well, right? So I don't believe purely in an asynchronous model, right? I don't believe in giving you access to content, you go off and learn it in an isolated fashion and go through the recipe and don't have any of that interaction. We have to have a hybrid model that puts people face to face with you, right? And we can do that through a number of different ways. We can train existing faculty that's on site and on staff, right? But in an environment that's not accessible, right, and we have to rely on virtual instruction, we want to do it in a format that has frequent touch points with the student, right? So that you're not just absorbing content and not engaging or interacting with anybody, but there's a social aspect to it, and that it's a hybrid between, a fully live lecture in front of a classroom versus a completely asynchronous access to a library of materials. We've got to meet in the middle, right, to where you're getting personalized one-on-one instruction, you're in a group setting, right, working with other students. So I absolutely agree with you. That's part of the challenge and where we need to go. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here as well. Yes?
I just was wondering about utilizing things like business insights or analytics to, can you even apply that to students, with the current government regulations, in terms of how much information can be utilized? Because what my primary concern is, or what comes to my mind, is a child who may have like dyslexia. Would this be able to adapt to something like that? I guess that's what I'm wondering about.
So it's a really interesting observation. And when I mentioned my background's in adaptive learning, it's in adaptive learning and literacy specifically for that reason, right? So that was a challenge that we had to face as well. There are regulations that limit what you can and can't do, what you can and can't share. But there are people pushing to change those regulations. And we're also trying to build the systems in a way to work within regulations to understand that we need to provide the best instruction possible, playing within what we need to operate within. Yes.
Going back, so how do you do you go into a live teaching environment, like a regular classroom, and sit down and just make an observation, or how do you all test your product in a classroom or with students? I should say, that's the main thing. How do you test your product with students? Because a classroom is totally different from maybe the lab that you may have.
Sure.
And definitely, you may have 30 different personalities.
Sure.
That need special attention.
Well, it's the same as anything else, right? We have to do observation, right? And so you create a virtualized classroom, you observe the students and the interactions that they're going through, and you adjust based off of feedback, right? Just like anything else. So that's why taking the software model and what's worked in the technology space and applying it to education. It's all about, working within the constraints that we have, challenging some of those notions, and aggressively getting feedback of what's effective, what's not effective. And it's not all perfect from the jump, right? So it's not a golden hammer, one-size-fits-all solution for everything, but it's an aggressive step in the right direction. Okay, so a couple other things here. In terms of the programs that we're offering currently at Woz U, with the technology emphasis, obviously it's market-driven technology skills. So we value our students' time and ensure that when they join a program with us, that every hour that we're spending with them is an hour that goes according to a syllabus that was directed by an employer saying, this is a skill that we need these students to have, right? No more, no less, and trying to make sure that it's as accelerated as possible, making it as affordable as possible. So that's what gets us to that incremental format. Okay, programs that we're currently offering, computer support specialist, software development, data science, cybersecurity, mobile application development. And the way that we structure all of these programs is really intended for career pathing, right? Recognizing that anybody who's gonna break into any industry, and technology is no exception, you're gonna start out as a generalist, right, with kind of a broad understanding of different concepts and how to apply them. But your career is around specializing in an area that's important to you, right, or that you're specifically talented in. And everything we've got is built on top of our cloud platform, right? So a lot of great things here. It's a modularly developed curriculum, recognizing that if a technology shifts and is no longer relevant, we want to be able to replace that content without replacing the entire program or continuing to teach it even though it's no longer in demand. We've got tech-driven learning labs, right? Coding exercises, you type your solution into the browser, it systematically grades and analyzes it and provides you feedback. Portals for employers, business insights, everything is mobile compliant so you can get access to your content on a mobile device. And then high integration with other existing educational systems, right? Because again, we're here to supplement and support. This thing decided to not like me now. There we go. All right, how much time do we got?
10 more minutes.
10 more minutes, okay, good. So, one notion in technology is really that a career in technology is not linear, right? You don't follow a recipe and accomplish something. My experience, and hopefully that's unique to me, but it's more about failures than successes, right? It's about attempting new things, right? A lot of technology hasn't been accomplished before, so you try something new, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, maybe you took the right or wrong approach. And so we really want to capture that notion of exploration and discovery in the way that we teach technology. Not linear, not follow a recipe and memorize the quiz so that you can pass it, so that you can get through the class, but applying the hands-on practices that you need to be able to demonstrate that you know these skills. Okay, so when we set out to develop our curriculum, we developed it in a modular fashion, recognizing that if you were to follow this from the top down, there's a lot of concepts that are really required and essential for everybody. But with so many different technologies and vendors and languages that are constantly shifting, right, we don't want our students to be completely bound to those. We want them to have some freedom in choosing those. And so, why did you build this system with this language or this platform or this technology? We want them to have good answers for that. We want them to know that there's a lot of different techniques that you could be using to understand those, right? At least at the surface level, read a little bit about them, what are you trying to build, and then selecting the technology or the tooling that you believe is best suited to meet your goals. And guess what? You might be wrong sometimes. That's life and technology. So you adjust and you adapt and you move back into something and try it again, right? So a lot of different systems that I've built, you build them up, tear it down, throw it away, build it again, it's a little bit better, tear it down, throw it away, build it like the fourth or fifth time you build it, you're pretty satisfied with it. So that's really what we tried to capture with the way that we structure our curriculum. Each of the nodes that you see here is intended to be kind of an isolated block of instruction. Again, as a service provider to other educational institutions, some people, this is a 480-hour program here. Some people might say, yeah, but I've got a summer school that I've got like 6 weeks with some students and I'd like to teach them some basic information security skills. Cool, okay? Well, we can take these building blocks, these modular structure, and adjust them and adapt them to meet the needs of that school for that particular purpose. But,
Can you read down the list?
Sure.
It's kind of tough to.
Sure. So just an example here, this is our full stack web development course. It starts with a unit that we call coding from scratch, it's the basics. You move into front-end foundations, doing some, moderate to advanced HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Again, we don't offer an option there because it's the only language that's understood by the browser. So no need to have an option there. Everybody has to pick it up. We get into a programming foundations course, and there's a lot of different options, right? So the ones that we're currently supporting: Ruby, JavaScript, C# and .NET, Java, Python, right? The notion there being, when I was in school at university, I guess I already disclosed which university I went to, but you didn't have that option, right? They taught Java, and it was helpful and it kind of worked. But looking back on it, it would have been cool to make that decision, right? It would have been cool to understand why are we learning Java versus the next language, because when I came out of university, I wasn't working in Java, I was working in C#. Unfortunately for me, they're similar enough that I could make that transition, but it would have been cool to learn it from the jump, right? Database foundations, backend foundations, and how you're going to create backend services and APIs. Again, we teach them in the corresponding language. Front-end frameworks, we're covered in Angular, which is Google's baby, React, which is Facebook's, right? So as they compete, that's fine. We support both of them, and plans to support additional. We teach a little bit of responsive design, some UX best practices, agile project management, some career service skills, kind of going back to like the personal interaction, how to make sure that you're represented professionally. Cloud deployment, right? How do you take these systems that you're building as part of these hands-on projects that you're building, getting them deployed, getting them hosted? We do that through Amazon, AWS, and Microsoft Azure. A little bit of mobile web design. How do you take this web application that you built, make it work on different devices and display in a responsive format? And then web security, which was a big piece in my experience as an employer. I would find a lot of students coming out of accelerated programs that really didn't have an emphasis on security, right? And I'm responsible for a team in healthcare that's overseeing 4 million lives, right, in the healthcare space. And so I'd say, cool project, what vulnerabilities are in it currently? And if you can't have a conversation around it, I'm a little bit nervous, right? Because you got to write code for these 4 million lives with a lot of personal data, and if we expose personal data, the whole company, right? So again, this is us working with employers to say what's important to you. Everybody says security. So why are we not covering that as kind of the basics? So quick walkthrough there. We end everything with a group project, recognizing that to improve outcomes for our students, you got to have a working, demonstrable portfolio of your work that you can share with somebody to articulate that the skills that you've acquired are in line with the same level of complexity of what they're looking to hire.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, the beauty of this is if we're working with an educational institution and they say, we've already got a career services team that works with them, cool, pull it out, right? If they say, I'd actually like them to learn Ruby and JavaScript, cool. We kind of Lego block it into the format that works well for them. Okay, so that's really one of the first pieces of this just doesn't like me anymore. So our modular curriculum is a big piece for us. The second thing is this notion of continued education and progression, right? And I'll kind of blast through this quickly. The thought here is, with the previous program that we just walked through, right? That's this across the top with the Java emphasis. Okay, a student during this program might be working in a mobile web design unit, right? Taking web applications and make them responsive for mobile devices and say, man, I really like making mobile applications, okay? Well, they can go from this generalist to specializing in a specialization around mobile application development. Now starting to work with some of the device capabilities, starting to work with some of the native languages supported on the phones. So that's really the way that we approach our programs in any topic that we teach. We wanted to start general and start to kind of narrow that funnel down into a specialization. Do you have a question?
You just answered my question. So you start at a general level and then based on what
Sure.
your interests are, they can going more in depth which one they want to do.
Yeah, and that's it. It's kind of thinking like, think about at a university working on a 4-year degree, it's kind of tough to get a job after that first year, right? If you need to take a break and go get a job, it's hard to apply that degree to it, right? You might be able to get an internship or something like that. But with a format like this where we're teaching, these topics here are in demand for entry-level full-stack web developers, right? You can pause at that point, go out, work that job for a bit. When you're ready to progress in an area to a more advanced level and something that interests you, right? Or a specific area for demand that you're seeing. Okay, so modular curriculum, career pathing is a big piece for us. And the last little bit that I'm gonna blast through here is in order to deliver those things, you have to have a technology-first type of platform, right? And so what we did was, we looked at a lot of the systems that were available and kind of recognized that none of them were really built with technology in mind, right? And so to be able to control and challenge the student's experience to making it truly unique, we set out to build our own platform. Okay, so that's our Woz U student platform. A couple of kind of quick points on it. Everything's led by high quality video instruction, captivating content, bite-sized learning, right? A lot of these concepts you've heard of. And this is the real kind of bread and butter of what we're doing. The thought is to get out of the notion of a textbook, right? To get into something that is systematic, to where you don't have to necessarily have spent your whole life in technology to be able to teach and grade these topics, right? A lot of it's done for you systematically. So a student can go in and exercise different coding labs that are systematically graded. In the in the information security front, simulations on how do you develop a network and configure it, right? The thought here being that we want to be able to leverage technology to provide a truly effective learning experience for the students. All right, I think we're just about out of time here. Mobile compliance, so everything works well on the go. This is back to your point over here around hybrid learning versus asynchronous, right? So our online format is intended to be structured. So some of the services that can be provided using our systems, live lectures and one-on-one mentoring that we think is really key to getting that personal interaction. All right, and then everything that we're doing, is highly focused on higher education and working those skills back down into K-12 and trying to support the K-12 initiatives too, because what we find is a lot of times these topics are intimidating, right? That's where that gap comes from. It sounds scary. And guess what? We've made a lot of progress over the last 15 years, and these companies are highly invested in making these techniques and technologies more accessible to more people. So programming is easier now than it was 20 years ago, right? And that's intended for these companies to get a larger pool of talent. So the Googles and Microsofts and Apples of the world are trying to make this easier on everybody. We're trying to help support them as well by driving that back down into the K-12 space. And that's all we got.